Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today here at Talking TV. My name's Yvonne Villarreal and I'm a TV reporter here at the LA Times. In today's installment, we'll be looking at the prevalence of rape on television and the representations it's taken on. Joining me to discuss this topic is Times TV critic Mary McNamara.
Hello.
And my fellow TV reporter out in New York, Meredith Blake.
Hi guys.
I should warn that I know this from experience from borrowing Meredith's laptop. It goes a little crazy sometimes. So if we lose her at any point during this discussion, it's because her laptop just called it quits.
Spazzed out.
Yes, spazzed out. So let's talk about this weighty subject here with rape. We were sort of saying, you know, the tipping point seems to have been the recent Game of Thrones episode with Jaime and Cersei, and some of the anger was more lodged at it deviating from the books, but some of it was also the representation, and I know you have a lot to say about it, so we could just go right into it.
This is our most serious talking TV ever, but I think that this is a really important topic because it is coming up more. We're seeing a lot of discussions on Twitter about it, and I think that that episode of Game of Thrones really was, as you said, the tipping point. I mean, so we had, for those of you who don't follow the show, we had this, so there's this incestuous relationship between Jaime and Cersei, who are brother and sister, and in this scene, and it's made even more horrifying by the fact that their son, Joffrey, who is horrible and has been killed, and we're all happy that he's dead, he's lying there, and Jaime comes in, and he's been separated from Cersei for a while, and he forces himself upon her and then rapes her. Now, in the book, and I went back, I read the books in preview of the show, it's one of those acts that starts off violently and then becomes consensual. That is not how it was portrayed in the show. It was, she was fighting it all the way and saying no very clearly, and he did it anyway. Then some of the furor, I think, came because the creators of the show said, oh, well, they sort of went, well, it was kind of consensual in the end. So you had a lot of issues going on. You had the idea that, you know, that there was a rape depicted, which is, you know, in a television show that is known for its violence. Then you had the creators saying things like, well, no, it was consensual at the end, and the people who are watching it going, well, wait a minute, no, it didn't look consensual. Then you have people saying, well, that's not the way it happened in the book, because in the book, you know, Jaime isn't depicted then as a horrible rapist. He's just depicted as someone who started off as a horrible rapist, but then, you know, so it was like all very confusing. But it did launch then a lot of conversations about the number of rapes that we're seeing on, you know, really good television shows. We saw one on Downton Abbey that was very shocking because it was so tonally different from the show itself. We've seen rape used in The Americans, where we had backstory rape. Top of the Lake was about the possible rape of a young girl, and then we learned that the main character had been raped, and we saw a lot of flashback scenes in that. So we're seeing, you know, people saying there's too much rape on TV. It's being used too loosely. It's being plot device. It's being used as entertainment. I mean, I feel like, I think that, you know, the Jaime Cersei scene had a lot of problems going in, which is that I don't know if people would have felt better about it if it had started as a rape and then ended up being consensual. I think a lot of people would have been quite upset about that. You know, they've hewed very closely to what happens in the book, so I think if they had left that out, they would, I think they were damned if they did, damned if they didn't. It was just one of those really ugly scenes that, you know, came from the imagination of George R.R. Martin, and was there to show you the horror of the various characters. There was also another scene in Game of Thrones in which the rogue members of the Night's Watch, who were previously kind of good guys turned bad guys, were seen then raping a large number of women in the background. These women who had been the captives of an incestuous father, and so people were upset about that as well. So I think, you know, it's, within the Game of Thrones universe, I think you have to remember that there's brutality in every single minute of Game of Thrones. Within the larger universe of television, I think we have to first acknowledge the fact that television has gotten more violent in general, so it's not surprising that you're seeing more rapes. Also, we're seeing a lot more female characters on television, so you are, you know, a violent act, I mean, rape is an act of violence against women. So if you have more female characters, you're going to see more rape. I also think, and I know this is going to sound terrible, that in a way it's good. This is a topic that television has shied away from famously, because society has shied away from it famously. I mean, it's in recent memory, it was something where women didn't report it because somehow it would reflect badly on them.
Well, to sort of go on that topic, I mean, previously you used to see rape a lot happen in real time on TV shows, and now we're seeing sort of the characters that endured it like sort of recall it. Like,
right.
We're not actually seeing it unless it's like flashback. It's sort of something that existed before the show happened, like before we pick up on the show. So what do you think that speaks to where we are as a culture, like how?
Well, I think that's a different issue, and I want to get Meredith in on this. It's like, what do you think? I mean, you know, Mad Men had a rape scene. I mean, what do you? I mean, do you think that this is something that we're seeing too much of, that people are using too much of, or is it just one of those where we're just not used to seeing it, and now a lot of the taboos have been lifted, and we're seeing it more?
I think part of it is that there is a taboo, and we aren't used to seeing it, and we're in this age where there's kind of this constant one-upmanship, especially in drama series, where you're seeing, for a while there it was killing off main characters, and you can't kill everyone off, so you have to come up with other ways to sort of shock your audience and up the ante, I guess it is, which is a terrible way of thinking about something as traumatic as rape. But I do think that's a part of it. I don't think writers are thinking, gee, what haven't we done yet? But I think that the need to kind of constantly drive the narrative forward, especially on a show like Game of Thrones, where you've seen every kind of horror imaginable. I mean, you've seen children get thrown out of the window in the first episode. So I think there's always going to be a need to up the stakes, for good or bad. I think it's all execution dependent, right? I mean, I think there's a way of depicting it that's sensitive and that kind of honors the difficulty of the experience and afterwards, and I think there's a less sensitive way of handling it.
I do think it's interesting that in this time where we do see this hyper-violence, that it's rape that's causing this outrage, not like the rampant murder of everybody, or torture,
right.
Or the dismemberment, or even the violence against children, which to me is even more shocking, because now we're seeing children killed, we're seeing children put in violent situations, we're seeing children kill, which is something that we never saw on television before. But I think, what you were saying about the up the ante, you could look at it that way. You could also look at it as widening the story, which is that, this is something that happens to women. It's part of the human experience. I mean, it's a horrifying part of the human experience, but it's something that does happen. And I think that what you were asking earlier about the use of it as backstory, I mean, I know I have gotten a little irritated where it seemed like a lot of the strong women or strong, colder women,
this is the way to humanize them.
Yes, that they were raped.
This is why they're cold and bitchy, because they were raped.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that we have to be careful not to use that as a crutch. But again, I think it's just we're at a time where television is exploring areas that it's never been allowed to explore before. And so in a way, it's good to see women having had this horrible experience on the other side of it. They're still dealing with it in Top of the Lake. It's obviously affected the main character a lot. In House of Cards, it's affected her a lot. But she is not defined by that experience. It's just one experience that she's had. And I think that that's an important story to tell. And I think it's, that television is about, we're talking to ourselves about the things that we are experiencing as humans. And so the fact that it seems like rape is occurring on a lot of different shows like this year, well, it's not really. I mean, it's a half dozen shows. It's just the big shows.
Well, and also one that sort of got the discussion going or debate going on the in-betweens of modern sexual behavior was Girls. And we had that scene with Adam Driver's character, Adam, and Natalia, where it was like an uncomfortable thing. Was he forcing her? Was he not? Was it just like an uncomfortable thing? And so
what did you think? Did you think that was a rape?
I remember at the time discussing it with Joe downstairs, and I did feel like it was a rape.
You did?
Yeah.
What did you think, Meredith? Do you remember that episode?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's hard to forget that episode. I think, oh, this is tough. I mean, I think that one falls into a murky gray area that's familiar to a lot of people, unfortunately.
Well, and Lena, like, talking to us, said, to me it seemed like a terrible miscommunication between two people who didn't know what they really wanted. That's how was her takeaway.
Yeah, which is, I think, brave that is ambiguous and that it doesn't come down firmly on one side or the other, because I think that's probably an experience that a lot of people can relate to, you know, especially young people who are, you know, out there dating and seeing people and trying to figure themselves out. And I think that's kind of the bravery of it, is that we don't, you know, unlike, say, Game of Thrones, which I think is unambiguous what happened there, and most of these other situations, that's one that was a little grayer. I mean, the Americans had something a little like that too. Recently, between Philip and Elizabeth Jennings, there was kind of a, you know, started out consensual and then it became very uncomfortable and sort of abusive. So, you know, I think that gray area is really important to explore, too.
Well, and it's there in Orange is the New Black, too. Like we see, you know, with Porn Stash, how he uses his power, like...
Absolutely.
Yeah, pleasure me and I'll give you this kind of thing. So it's a weird... Yeah.
But I think it's really important that these things are happening because people are having these conversations. And if you look at the way, the reactions to this, you know, the newest, these things that we're just describing, you're seeing, you know, both ends of the spectrum, where some people are saying, this is a good thing, we need, this is, you know, it needs to come out of the shadows, this is not something that is somehow divorced from other acts of violence, because I think that that's been a harmful thing, where rape has been seen as somehow not just an act of violence, you know, but like something that the victim was participating in, or that damaged the woman in some, you know, essential and inevitable way, that she was now not worth as much. And I think that that's something, you know, as much as when it happened on Downton Abbey, all I could think of was like, oh my God, this poor couple, they can't ever catch a break, and we're going to do this to her. And also because it was so, although we had seen the Thomas beaten up for being gay, it was like the most violent thing we had seen on and it was very violent. And but I think that what he was trying to do there was to show you not just the shame that a woman would feel being raped, but also the fear. It wasn't just that if I report this, I will be seen as a marked woman, but that my husband will feel obligated to kill the rapist. And I think that that is a very real thing. I mean, I remember that from my youth. You know, if anything ever happens, don't tell your father, because he'll be forced to kill the guy. And then the woman is put in this situation where it's like, oh my God, well then I'm certainly not going to tell anybody. And I think that that's an important issue that needs to be addressed, whether it was as gracefully inserted into the season as it could have been, I don't know. But it, you know, I think that these are all issues that the writers of each specific show, I feel like, are coming at it, you know, from a point of integrity and from a point of wanting to make certain statements about their characters, and also about the time. Many of these shows are period pieces to show you, you know, the dangers of this kind of silence. You know, the fact, so it's not really their fault that it's happening, you know, in a cluster kind of thing. But I think that it is, you know, an important trend to, like, sort of address this in a way that isn't a, you know, the very special episode, which is the way, you know, TV used to have to tiptoe around it.
Right. Because, yeah, I think my first, like, introduction of rape on TV was, like, Kelly Taylor on 90210.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, I was terrified to leave the house, because I'm, like you said, I was like, if it happens, my dad will have to kill the guy because he will be so enraged. But yeah, it's, what do you make of the way things have sort of transformed and the evolution of how we're talking about it?
Well, I remember, I mean, for me, the most famous was when Edith Bunker got raped. And that was, I mean, that was huge because, first of all, it's a comedy, even though it was a very socially significant comedy. But also, again, it was the use of, you know, here's Edith Bunker, she's an older woman. It's like, to show you very vividly, this has nothing to do with how she's dressing. This is, you know, to counteract those assumptions about somehow women are asking for it. You know, no one could be further from that than Edith Bunker, and the violence of it, and the horror of it, and the shame. And that was a huge moment in television, you know, that to show you the impact it had on the family, rather than just, you know, it being used, you know, I mean, rape has been used. I mean, I remember, you know, when they did this series of, like, made-for-TV movies about women getting pulled over and by Southern sheriffs and put in jail and they were inevitably raped. But this was like one where it was like, you know, showing you the whole dimension of it.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Meredith? What do you remember?
Well, yeah, what do you remember?
Oh, I'm trying to think. I mean, the Kelly Taylor one stands out.
Mm-hmm.
Also, because like with everything on that show, it was gone the next episode.
Yes, exactly.
You know, that is something that, you know, we're now in this more era of serial television,
Mm-hmm.
where stories are drawn out for episodes, for seasons even. And so I think that is a positive development when it comes to, you know, seeing the fallout from traumas like
Mm-hmm.
this. You know, people don't recover, you know, at 55 minutes after the hour. It takes a long time. I don't remember. I mean, I think Kelly is the one that I remember the most.
Well, and as someone, I mean, you recap shows for us, and I believe it's Downton Abbey and
Mm-hmm.
Mad Men where we've seen this happen. I mean, Joe wanted me to ask you about the Pete and Peggy early on, if you consider that to be rape, but I mean,
Pete and Peggy, no.
Peggy, that was an unfortunate sexual decision.
Exactly.
It wasn't rape.
Okay, Joe, you have your answer.
But
Yeah,
no, I don't see the one that always comes up is Pete and the au pair, which I think is a lot closer to rape than Pete and Peggy. If you guys remember that, when he sort of corners the au pair, I think it was season 3, maybe.
Well, and Joan and her
that's
horrible
much
husband.
Clearer. And Joan and her husband, of course. Yeah.
But what did you think of Anna in Downton? Because a lot of, you know, people that, you know, review the show were kind of like, this is just so like over the top, and, you know, why are we doing this now? And how did you feel about it?
I think there's two things to look at. I think there's how the scene itself was executed, and then there's kind of how the aftermath was handled. I think the execution, I think you could probably say it was a little brutal, and it was a huge departure for the show, which on one hand is good, because obviously this is a terrible thing that happened and they shouldn't kind of make light of it and cut away from it, but at the same time it was jarring, and I understand why it upset people. I think the aftermath, you know, some people criticized it because it became more about Bates than it was about Anna. That it became about, what will Bates do? Will Bates have to go back to prison? Instead of how is poor Anna feeling? But I think, to Mary's point, I think that actually reflects how a woman of that time probably would have thought about what happened to her. She probably would have wanted to forget about it, and most importantly, make sure her husband didn't know about it, and move on.
I think it was also a way for, you know, Downton Abbey to address this sort of the powerlessness of servants, which they, you know, one of the flaws of the show is that these are the most powerful servants on the planet. I mean, they're basically on equal footing with their employers, and you know, I mean, for women working under the stairs, this was like a real threat, and not necessarily from other servants, but also from like the guests or from, you know, the people, and so that would have totally blown apart the universe of Downton Abbey to have, like, you know, one of the upstairs, you know, men assault a downstairs woman. But I think that this was a way to remind everybody, you know, these people, they don't feel like they have the same kind of legal rights. They can't, you know, and women in particular can't, you know, they wouldn't call the police. And I think that this is happening at a time when rape is a big discussion on college campuses, in the military, where, you know, women are finally exercising their right to complain and to complain on a big level, where we're looking at, like with the college campuses, where it's like, why are these women going to the administration? Why are they not just picking up the phone and calling the cops? You know, why are they, you know, why is this being left up to the military to decide? Why aren't they calling the police? I think this comes back to the issue of creating, you know, an environment in which we just accept that rape is a crime. It's a violent crime. It isn't, you know, about, you know, a blurring of desire and then indecision. It's, you know, it's an act of violence, and it should be treated that way.
Right.
And so, you know, getting back to Game of Thrones, I did want to say this one thing. It's like that one scene where they had like there were like 2 or 3 rapes occurring at the same time in the background of the Casterly, what is it, Craster's Keep. And it was like one of the most horrifying things I've seen. It was only on screen for like about, you know, 2 seconds or whatever. And it was like, oh my God. And then all of a sudden I was thinking, you know, as disturbing as that is, I find that has more integrity than the scenes of the women writhing on the stripper pole,
Right.
or, you know, the prostitutes who look like they're having the time of their lives and they're just enjoying having sex with these guys, you know, which to me is much less honest. You know, that show, many shows have depicted women in brothels. We've talked about that before, you know, the sex position scenes. And so those are women that are essentially in sexual slavery, but they're always depicted as having a great time, which is really dishonest.
Well, you know, talking about gender dynamics here, I mean, there is Ray Donovan, which shows, now I'm forgetting his name, but one of the brothers, you know, in his past was, and this is one of the gray areas of, he was molested by a priest. Like, you know, so, I mean, what do you make of telling the stories that maybe aren't as common but still need to be told about? It happens to boys too in some form.
Absolutely. And you know, I was thinking about this morning. I was thinking, you know, we do use the word molested, and it's like many of these boys were raped, and we won't use that word. It's like, you know, many of these cases, you know, it's like these boys were raped and sodomized. It's like, but we say molested as if that somehow, I don't know, separates them from women. I don't know whether it's sexism or whatever, but yeah, I mean, I do think that, and I would imagine that as these taboos fall, we will see more of that as well on television, which will be upsetting. But, you know, and it's like some of the Meredith said is how it's handled.
Right.
If these things are upsetting to watch, and they should be upsetting to watch. It's when they become not upsetting to watch that we should be nervous. But we should also be nervous about when torture becomes not upsetting to watch, when murder becomes not upsetting to watch. I mean, I think that that's something that just you know, in general, television and film and books, I mean, we need to make sure that we're not, in exploring these very scary subjects, we're not inuring ourselves to them, that we remember these are horrible things.
Meredith, would you like to add anything else on the topic before we sign off?
I would say maybe to that point that I think, you know, one of the things on Game of Thrones, you know, last season the scene that got all the attention was the Red Wedding. And that was also something that was, you know, obviously in the books, but was altered somewhat in the series. And one of the ways it was altered was that Rob's pregnant wife was stabbed, and it was horrific. And I think maybe what you're seeing on that show, and maybe something that you're seeing across the board, is that, you know, violence is up across the board, and particularly violence against women. So I guess the thing is not only what you said, which is that, you know, we should be horrified by all violence, but we should also keep in mind that a lot of it seems to be directed at women, maybe a disproportionate amount. I mean, I don't know if you can do that on Game of Thrones, if you can count who gets what, but or if that's even valuable. But I think that's the thing that I think troubles people, is that it does seem disproportionately directed towards women.
But I do think it's also, you know, not to be the Game of Thrones apologist, but you also have a lot of strong female characters on Game of Thrones, and you have female characters who are committing violence, which is also kind of a new thing. But I do agree with you, and it angers me as a woman because I don't want to see so much violence committed against women. But it also angers me just as a human. It's like somehow the death of a young woman, that's always what starts off so many shows. It's like some young woman is dead, and I'm like going, do we not value young men? I mean, it's like, why is it that the death of a young woman is seen as like the ultimate crime? It's like, so if a boy gets killed, it's somehow not valued as much as if a girl gets killed. And I think that we have to be really careful with that. You know, what are we saying with that? I mean, is it because of the sexual nature, or is it because women are still seen as somehow, you know, more innocent than men, you know, that they're less deserving of being murdered than men? So I think that, you know, that actually is a problem on both sides of the gender equation.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that's interesting about Broadchurch, which I'm sure you saw, right?
Yes.
Right, because it's a show about it.
It's about a boy.
Once. I mean, to think about it cynically, it's a show finally about a little boy who's murdered brutally, and kind of what happens after that.
And you know, when I saw it, I went, "Oh my God, thank God, it's a boy." I mean, and isn't that awful? Yeah. But that was like
it's
my
not
reaction.
the reaction you want.
Because it was horrible, and everybody was devastated, and as they would be, you know, as you should be, no matter what, no matter the gender of the person who's been murdered.
Yeah.
Well, those tuning in, if you want to weigh in on our topic, feel free to leave comments or tweet at us. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.